Now, my understanding is that you're going to, in this class, reverse engineer a script, turn it
Well,
into a book, or am I missing?
that's not exactly what we'll be doing in the class, actually, but it's something of great interest that we can talk about a little bit. I have had some modest success in my career, um, not just in film, working and making a living as a screenwriter, but also publishing with major publishers, for the most part, actually, in my case, all New York publishers. The publishing business still is mainly New York, just like Hollywood is still Hollywood. And on several occasions, I took something that I had written as a film, and in some instances, I'd actually had options, made some money on it, but had never really ever gotten it to where I wanted it to be. That is to say, a deal, that got made into something that audiences could participate. And what I did was use the novel, use the screenplay as an elaborate outline for a novel. No writing is easy, but it's easier once all the heavy lifting has been done. Once you've written a screenplay, you know who the characters are, you know almost all of the dialogue, certainly a lot of the dialogue, most of the dialogue. The story is all worked out. You now have merely to write it. Now, I pause on merely because there's nothing mere about writing, but it is easier to just put the words on once you have all of the incidents and the events and the anecdotal stuff worked out. And then it becomes a question of description. I have had success at that. That is to say, couldn't make the movie happen, so wrote it as a novel, and then sold the novel as a novel, was able to get the novel published, and then suddenly there was interest in it as a novel. That is to say, an adapted novel, adapted for the screen. My current gripe with Hollywood, with the American film industry, is the refusal to do original stuff. Well, you can take an original screenplay and turn it into a novel, and then it's no longer original. Now it's an adaptation, and that's what they prefer to do. So you can kind of, in a sort of a Zen surrender sort of a way, make it what they want it to be. I also will tell you that I find greater satisfaction in writing novels. They're easier. They're not easy, but they're easier. They are more tolerant of inefficiency and bad economy. I'm not saying you should be inefficient and uneconomical. And when I talk about economical, I mean in terms of moving story freight, moving character freight with a little bit of language rather than the other way around. And you'll really get killed in a movie, in a screenplay, if it's inefficient. But a novel, I think, because the viewer, the reader of the novel, has the opportunity to turn the pages faster, or even to skip over stuff, or conversely to go back and review stuff, makes it somewhat easier for the writer to write it down. And as I've said, that sometimes people say to me, yeah, but Richie, novels are longer than a screenplay. My last novel, and I don't mind bragging, it made the Times bestseller list. Okay, just number 13 and only for a week, but that's not a small thing, the Times list. That was about 236 pages or 245 pages, something like that, in TypeScript. I'm sorry, the published book. So in TypeScript, it was about 300 pages. Now, a screenplay should not be much more than 100 pages. The screenplays are getting shorter now, which I think is good. The last job that I did, I had an assignment this past year, and that script came out, I think, at 93, 94 pages. And it's full, it's complete. And my point is, and the reason I'm dwelling on these page counts is, it's easier to write a longer thing than a shorter thing. And it would seem counterintuitive, but think about it. There's a famous letter that Ernest Hemingway wrote. He was in Cuba, living in Cuba, and I believe he was writing The Old Man and the Sea, one of his later books, a wonderful book. Of course, everything he did was wonderful. And in the midst of working on the book, he wrote a long letter, it was 9 pages long, to Maxwell Perkins, the legendary editor who worked with a lot of famous writers, including Hemingway. And he was discussing various aspects of the book and whatever. And at the end of the letter, he says, well, that's about it for now, Max. Please forgive me for writing such a long letter. I didn't have the time to write a short one. It takes more time to do what artists have to do, which is to cull and select and throw away. So much screenwriting education is about structure and construction and building up. And I think there is some useful time spent considering that. But ultimately, creating dramatic narratives is not about building up. I think it's about tearing down and taking away. It's about discovery, taking the cover off and finding something that's already there. I never knew a writer. I have a lot of experience myself as a writer, but that experience is leveraged exponentially by all the writers I've worked with very intimately, very closely over, now for 35 years, here on campus with writers in our advanced graduate screenwriting classes, but also in the community. I am a script doctor. I'm a pretty busy script doctor. I give notes to lots of writers. No small number of those writers have deals at studios. They're coming to me and saying, ask me the hard questions before the producer asks them. Becoming more and more routine, I think, in Hollywood, even when you have a deal, to consult with somebody before you actually submit it to the studio. And so having done that has expanded my own experience, as I say, exponentially. And I've never known a writer, I've never met a writer who wasn't surprised by things that happened in her story, by lines of dialogue that a particular character suddenly spoke. It's as if it kind of has a life of its own.